Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
As much as the numbers for Jawan were slightly higher than Gadar in terms of the declared net box office, in terms of pure footfalls, Gadar was the film of 2023
Wow.
because average ticket price of Gadar was significantly lower than Jawan as well as Pathaan, and the extent to which Gadar fared well in the single screen in the tier 2, tier 3 towns, where the ticket rates are as low as $100 or $120 compared to the average price of Pathaan and Jawan, just showed the fact that the footfalls for Gadar were drastically, not just marginally, but drastically higher than any of the other three films that came along.
For cinephiles, cinema halls are like places of worship. After the long and harsh COVID winter, cinema theaters had much to cheer about in 2022 and then in 2023, which was a banner year for Hindi cinema. I wanted to do an episode on the patterns and trends we are seeing across cinema halls as people return to cinema halls. An episode where we unpack the massive theatrical success of films like Pathaan, Jawan, Gadar 2, and Animal. Couldn't have wished for a better guest for today's episode than Akkshay Rathie, an exhibitor and distributor with operations spanning across 3 states. Akkshay is not just someone who's deeply entrenched in the exhibition business and has a pulse for the box office, but he's also a true blue film buff. And you guys know how much I love chatting with folks who love cinema. This is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. But before moving on, an important reminder. If you enjoy organic conversations centered on Indian cinema, Love of Cinema podcast was created for people just like you. So if you enjoy the podcast, please do consider supporting the show. Love of Cinema podcast is my passion project. And with every episode, I've attempted to create something that cinephiles will continue to find value, not just today, but over time as well. If you find value in the conversations on the pod, please do consider supporting the show. Your support will help me continue creating content with shelf life for fans of Indian cinema everywhere. You'll find the link to support the show in the show notes. You can also support the show directly from the podcast website. It's fast, it's easy, and your support is greatly appreciated. Also, if you like the episode, please share the episode on social media, as that will help other people discover the podcast. Back to today's episode. Akkshay helped unpack the blockbuster year that was 2023 for Hindi cinema at the theaters. He articulated the consumption patterns across various tiers and explained why good storytelling still remains the biggest indicator of a good theatrical run. We also chatted about regional cinema's success, Ranbir Kapoor, and what Akkshay calls the out-of-syllabus phenomenon of 2023. Animal, of course, box office roundup, and much more with Akkshay Rathie. Here goes. Hey Akkshay, how are you doing?
Hey, Manshu, absolutely fine. Always a pleasure to be at Love for Cinema.
Thanks a lot, man. I'm so glad we are getting to do this chat after such a long time. I know we had been planning this for a few months now. What I had in mind was, just to pick your brain in terms of how the exhibition business has changed since COVID and what are the trends that you're seeing. And I also wanted to talk about regional cinema a bit, and then especially Marathi cinema, since you're also based in Nagpur. So, Akshay, let's turn back the clock a little bit and go back to when COVID kind of wreaked havoc, right? So this is 2020, 2021. Just like any business that runs in enclosed spaces, cinema halls suffered the most, because nobody wanted to be inside enclosed spaces. So what was it like during those 2 years? I mean, it was probably hell for you guys. But if you could tell us, how you were reconciling what was going on.
Sure. So, Himanshu, you mentioned that just like any other business that operated indoors, right? Not quite. So the thing that was actually unique about cinema halls, that among all the functions, all the businesses, all the services that exist in India, uh, possibly the first business that was ordered shut by the authorities was cinema halls, and the last one that was actually allowed to start functioning again after the COVID waves simmered down was cinema halls again. So I can't think of any other business that was shut for longer than cinema halls. And whenever we engaged with the authorities in the state or the center, we were always told that this is not a business that's a necessity, it's not a priority, and therefore, we aren't in any hurry to really get it to open anytime soon. And that's what made the sector bleed for the longest time. Because while they were shut, the revenues were down to zero, right? But then when you are maintaining infrastructure of that sort in thousands of cinemas across the country, there are operational expenses that you can't make do without. There are maintenance costs. You want to retain your people, therefore, there are salaries that are being paid. There are expenses around the housekeeping and all of that, because you need to keep the places in a condition where when they reopen, they can function immediately. So, all of these factors were at play. And as far as I remember, I can't think of any state government or municipal corporation in the country that gave any waivers like property tax or any of these things that are expenses otherwise. So that bleed was on as well. The minimum demand charges for electricity without the cinemas functioning were being paid month on month as well. So it was fairly brutal on the sector in that sense. But having said that, the good thing is, an overwhelming majority of the cinema halls, the 9,300 odd that existed before the pandemic, most of them actually managed to sail through and survive onwards when we emerged from the pandemic and come out. So that was broadly how things worked between those 2.5 years.
And was there anything that was going on in cinema halls at that time, or they were just locked up?
Oh, they were locked up. The only thing that was happening time to time was people from the housekeeping staff with their, with the COVID kits and all of that were going in, doing some bit of the cleaning and maintenance, checking up the stuff to make sure that everything is functioning fine and is well maintained. So that when the opportunity to open up comes around, things aren't a royal mess all over again. So that's the only thing that was happening. And, you know, a lot of us were, in some sense, a little, I'd say, I actually use the word privileged to be on a financial footing where we could actually retain all our staff. I can speak for myself in our company. With God's grace, we didn't have to let go of a single one of our employees across all the cinemas. And we could actually, and see, here's the thing, right? We're an independently run business. We've been running these cinemas for 70 plus years. And a lot of our staff, a lot of people who've been working with us, who are working with us for 10, 12, 15, 20, 25 years. And that's what turns them from being just your employees to being like your family, being your people, right? And at a time of crisis, when people aren't getting salaries, people aren't being able to sustain a living for their families, leaving them high and dry in terms of their income would have been brutal. So sure, because the cinemas were not functioning, we had to cut down the salaries that we used to pay to them on a monthly basis. But we actually managed to retain all our team members by paying them some salary or the other through those 2 years. And that's something I consider ourselves, to be very fortunate about, that we could do this for our people.
Absolutely. That's wonderful to hear that, you didn't have to let go of anybody. So, that's what, especially for some of the people down the, hierarchy. I mean, this is like who are living paycheck to paycheck. So,
Right.
means a lot. So, Akshay, now, after, we have been through the majority of COVID, so to speak, and then comes 2022. And now suddenly, we have some films which are bringing in people, right? People have a fatigue and they want to go to the big screen and watch big movies. And correct me if I'm wrong, but 2022 saw three big films. There is RRR, of course, there is Kashmir Files, and there is also Drishyam 2.
That's right. But Himanshu, even before that, in 2021, just as we were emerging from the pandemic, we had a couple of absolute crackers at the box office in the form of Rohit Shetty's Suryavanshi, which came around Diwali that year. And soon after that, towards Christmas, closer to Christmas, you had Pushpa, which came in, wreaked havoc
That's right.
at
Yeah.
the cinema halls. And in its own way, not up to the kind of expectations that were pegged off it. Even 83 that came on the Christmas weekend in 2021. So these three movies came in really, I'd say, if nothing else, gave all of us exhibitors in the industry an assurance that with the right kind of films, even now, after the pandemic, people are willing to come back to theaters. So that, I think, was the first sign of, I'd say, the revival of the sector. And then, of course, in 2022, you had RRR, you had Drishyam, you had a couple of other films that came in really redefined the benchmarks for the business. Where with a film like RRR, you saw that it's not just a scenario where people are going to turn up very selectively for films and turn up in selected numbers. The elderly will stop coming. The kids would be brought to cinemas because of the worries for safety. All those notions got quashed with movies like RRR, where everyone and their mothers turned up, and not just once but multiple times. So those were thankfully, the steps towards the revival of the sector in that sense that happened in 2022. And 2023 again was a bit of a watershed year for the industry, and especially Hindi, because core movies, right, really broke a bit of a glass ceiling in some sense, and
Absolutely.
ushered us into what is now called the 500 crore club. And that started with Pathaan, that was followed up by Jawan, and then in came Gadar 2, and then Animal. All of which really, showed us what the potential of the box office for Hindi films is. Because around that time, just a little before Pathaan, there was this conversation and chatter that Hindi cinema is dead and South is the only thing that's going to help the sector survive. And with due respect to the Southern fraternity, especially Tamil and Telugu, which did incredibly well at that time, I really think that a lot of people were, prematurely writing an obituary for Hindi cinema, which I think was a bit unfair. And more so because a lot of Hindi films that came along and didn't do well were films that were made before the pandemic. And in those 2.5 years, where people were sitting at home and only binge watching stuff on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Hotstar, etc., of course, with exposure to content that they were suddenly discovering on these streaming platforms, the palette of the audience had changed and evolved slightly. And therefore, a lot of content that was conceived and produced before the pandemic was actually shooting at a goalpost that had already moved. So that is something that
That's a
made
good
us
point.
have consistent hits. And once that came back into play, and we really started delivering the kind of movies that are truly theatrical in nature, that can draw audiences in huge numbers for the cinematic experience. Once those started coming in, like Pathaan and Gadar and Jawan and all these films, people turned up in numbers that were absolutely unprecedented.
And Akshay, I wanted to ask you this. So, for example, films like Drishyam 2 and Oh My God 2, right? Usually we would see not such a big footfall for these films, right? Because people tend to watch these at home on OTT. They're willing to wait for it, unlike action or tentpole movies like RRR and so forth. So, what do you think explained the theatrical success of Drishyam 2 and Oh My God 2? Was it just the fatigue that people were coming out of COVID too, or there was much more to it?
I think there was significant more to it, Himanshu, where I really think that both of these, right, Drishyam and Oh My God, are fairly iconic franchises. Where the first Oh My God had done incredibly well, the first Drishyam also, not just in Malayalam and the southern version, but even the Hindi version with Ajay Devgan, was hugely popular. And therefore, those stories being taken forward or those franchises being taken forward obviously brings in a bit of a recall value, a bit of, I'd say, nostalgia among audiences, which makes them excited about those. But having said that, I wouldn't even give all the credit to the franchise value, because there have been enough part twos and part threes that have really failed and nosedived and not done well. So it's more than anything else some great storytelling that sure didn't have the size and scale in terms of the spectacle value. But I truly believe that both of these were good collective viewing experiences, where you had moments in these films where 300 people sitting together and heaving a sigh of relief, or laughing together, or clapping and cheering together for some event or some occurrence in the flow of the film, is something that added to the experience of consuming these films. And while we're talking about these two films that didn't have the size and scale, the other two discoveries that made heads turn, right, after the pandemic were, so to say, these small films in terms of budget and size and scale, but a whole different genre that the country woke up to. And those are the Kashmir Files and Kerala Story, where these are films that had no mega star cast. They didn't have any spectacle value or elements like 3D or 4DX or IMAX coming into play. But these were very heavily political films in some sense, which actually resonated hugely with the audience at large and brought people into cinemas in the kind of numbers that nobody could imagine. And that, in some sense, has actually triggered a movement where, because of these two films succeeding, now we have a lot of other, films that are speaking about issues or political events that the country at large really relates to. Uh, for example, in about a week and a half from now, you have a movie that's coming up, which is about the Article 370 being revoked in Jammu and Kashmir. And just going by the kind of reactions you're seeing to the trailer, it looks like there is some buzz and conversation around the film. So you never know how these issues that resonate with the people at large, or issues that people are emotionally connected to as Indians, can actually do something and surprise you at the box office. So a lot of interesting things of this sort have also been happening at the theaters.
Right, right. And I think the word of mouth is also a strong tailwind, for theatrical business, right? So even if it's not like a huge action movie or, huge spectacle or something, for Drishyam 2 and Oh My God 2 as well, I think the strong word of mouth helped a lot because people were talking about it and people couldn't wait, for it to come on the OTT. So they wanted to rush to the halls and watch it. That, and then let's talk about Jawan. Share, because I think with Jawan, the bar was really kind of, pushed up, right? So could you, well, first of all, let me ask you this. Were you surprised by the success of Jawan? I mean, on the heels of Pathaan, we knew that it's going to get a massive opening, and chances are if the film is even half good, it's going to do decent business. But the way that it just, blew the doors off,
Exploded.
yeah, yeah. Was that expected in the exhibition circles? Were you getting the feels for it before the movie was released?
Himanshu, absolutely. Trust me when I say this, as an exhibitor and more so as a movie buff, right? As an avid consumer of cinema, personally, and due respect to Pathaan, right? I was personally a lot more excited about Jawan and its prospects. And that actually reflected not just in terms of the net box office, but in terms of a lot of the consumption patterns for Jawan, where Pathaan was great, right? It did very well across the country. But the long tail of the exhibition sector, the tier two, tier three towns, right? The mass audience, the common man, the least common denominator of the social strata, related to and was more excited about Jawan than about Pathaan. So Pathaan was a nice urban action film, right? Jawan was this desi, hardcore, masala, mainstream film. And that's what actually brought more people to theaters in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns where the exhibition infrastructure exists compared to Pathaan. So in terms of footfalls, Jawan probably had slightly more footfalls than Pathaan in that sense. And that to me is a huge victory, right? Like, net box office is great. But to an exhibitor like me, the figure that actually excites me is the footfalls. And more so, the even distribution of footfalls in the multiplexes, the single screens, the tier one town, which is urban India, and the long tail of India's geography, which is rural India. And if a movie can actually cut across all of these demographics and psychographics in two great numbers, to me, that's a bigger success than something that does phenomenally well in Bombay, Delhi, Kolkata, Hyderabad, Chennai, Pune, and Bangalore, right? So Jawan really did that in a big way. And I think the other thing it did beautifully was this amalgamation or this bringing together of the southern and the Hindi speaking markets that it did, which doesn't really happen for Hindi cinema too often, right? You have southern films, especially Tamil and Telugu, that do incredibly well in the Hindi speaking belts. Because over a period of the last 15 to 20 years, you had these films coming with their dubbed versions on satellite channels like Star Gold and Setmax, which has built an audience over years. Hindi films, unfortunately, in Tamil Nadu, in EP, Telangana, and Kerala, have traditionally not done too well at the box office. Now, with Atlee, with Nayantara, with music by Anirudh, who himself is a star in some sense, Vijay Sethupathi as a villain who brings a very interesting zing of a character to the screen. These elements actually allowed Jawan to do some exciting business in Tamil Nadu, which otherwise doesn't happen for Hindi cinema. So this true marriage of Tamil as well as Hindi sensibilities and talent, I think really pushed the envelope for Hindi films as well. And that happened for Jawan, which I thought was very, very exciting. And I hope that a lot of us, in terms of filmmakers, can actually try and marry talent and sensibilities from these regions and truly make cinema which is not, Hindi cinema or Tamil or Telugu cinema in terms of the markets it appeals to, but Indian cinema in the true sense. Because clearly now, after the success of Jawan, we know that it's possible.
And Akshay, touching more on the patterns that you were talking about, the patterns that you were seeing, were they very similar between Jawan and RRR? I'm just trying to understand, what kind of appeal the films have. And so were you seeing similar patterns as RRR when you were talking about how it was cutting across tiers?
Like, see, RRR was a whole different animal, right? Because it didn't just cut across the Telugu speaking states, which were its home market, and Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, and the northern Hindi speaking belts. But it actually cut across markets that are as diverse as North America and Japan, right? Where you saw those videos that came out of North America, which was not the Telugu community or the Indian community watching it and celebrating it like it's a carnival in theaters. You actually had native North Americans who were dancing away to Natu Natu in screens in North America. You had a long run that went on for weeks together in Japan. Now, where do you see a scenario where cultures which are as diverse as India, North America, and Japan celebrating the same movie with that sort of enthusiasm? So I think RRR was truly one of our biggest global successes for Hindi cinema in that sense. And Jawan, of course, was a mega Indian success. It did really well outside of India, but essentially and only with the Indian diaspora abroad. Triple R was a different animal. I really think it showed us, what truly crossing over means. And we didn't, unlike a lot of other films that do well in Cannes or at the Toronto Film Festival and all of that, which are niche films that speak to sensibilities that are more Western than Indian. This was a hardcore, basic, commercial, masala Telugu film. And as they say, if you want to go global, you first go local. You tell tales that are truly yours in a style that is truly yours. And that's what excites people, in the West or in other markets, rather than us trying to ape what they do. Because as long as we do that, we'll always be a cheap duplicate of them, rather than being the best version of us. And that's what Triple R really did for I'd say not just the film, but for Indian cinema.
And how did this some of these massive blockbusters like RRR, Jawan, Pathaan, how did these films fare in China?
So China, I think, didn't really do as well as a couple of other films in the past from India, like Dangal, Secret Superstar had done in China. It did release there, I believe, but I don't think it was as big a ballistic success in China as a couple of our films from the past were. But having said that, like I said, I don't think there's any Indian film that did the kind of numbers that RRR did in North America or in Japan or a lot of these other markets that are otherwise not very conventional. In North America, there's a huge Telugu speaking community. But like I said, a movie like this went far beyond the Indian diaspora and the Telugu speaking community there. And actually, for the first time or in the biggest way ever, reached out to Americans in America and did what it did. And similarly, the Japanese in Japan, it did what it did. Parts of Europe, right, where you see people behave like they are, they are sitting out of Vijayawada and celebrating their favorite superstars and their favorite directors. So you really had them embracing the Indian consumption style, the old school celebratory Indian style, where if you go back in time, we weren't really the kind of people who analyze cinema and appreciate it for its art. We were people who celebrated our movies, right? You've seen that happen to Hindi cinema, where Bachchan movies from the 70s and 80s, right up to the Shah Rukh Khan and Salman Khan movies like Wanted and Dabang and all of that. You had people turning theaters into carnivals, right? Where people would dance to the best of songs, people would really clap and whistle to great scenes, people would throw money at the screen for some great shots. So all of that happening in places like North America, in Europe, and not by Indians, but by the natives, I think was the most delightful thing I've seen in a while happening to Indian cinema.
That's awesome to hear. After the couple of bad years, things really turned for the better in 2023. And of course, this is all before we had Oppenheimer and Barbie. So tell us more
Which was
about those two films. Yes.
sure. I mean, Oppenheimer, seeing India as the fifth largest market globally, I think was the reverse surprise of RRR, right? Where you suddenly had RRR doing what it did in the non-traditional markets, and then you suddenly had a film like Oppenheimer, which to a layman was a 3.5 hour long lesson in quantum physics, doing what it did. And I really think that that was the most pleasant surprise for Hollywood films in India, because a film like Oppenheimer didn't really cut across as well in some of the traditional Hollywood markets, and it just went hyper ballistic in India, which I think was a result of a couple of things, right? One, the buzz around Christopher Nolan, right? I really think that that true blue branding is what I consider Christopher Nolan's aura to be, right? It's almost like the belief among a lot of people I know is that if you don't understand and appreciate a Christopher Nolan film, you're an idiot. So you make a choice between publicly saying that you love a Christopher Nolan film, or you declare that you're an idiot who doesn't understand them. So it's a tricky choice in that sense. And of course, I'm saying this in jest. He's made some great films. The Batman trilogy is among my favorite movies of all time. But having said that, I really think that the kind of buzz and expectations and uh, talk of brilliance that Oppenheimer came to the box office with almost made it a compulsive watch for a lot of people who were, a lot of whom I suspect didn't even understand a lot of parts of the film, but were just in awe of the cinematic brilliance of it, or the storytelling of it, right? And that I think is what is the epitome of credibility for a filmmaker. And hats off to Christopher Nolan for commanding that sort of credibility, not just in the traditional mainstream big ticket Hollywood markets, but even in a place like India. So that's amazing.
And what about Barbie?
Also very exciting, right? So many Indian girls, and especially from my generation and the ones after that, have really just grown up on that toy, and that therefore there's such a strong nostalgic value to it among so many girls and so many kids that they decided to turn up. And the beauty of that time was that hashtag or that term which was being used, right? Barbieheimer, where a lot of people decided to turn up for these two movies that were such a contrast to each other. And I really think that was not just a celebration of Oppenheimer and Barbie, but that became a celebration of cinema, of the theatrical experience. And that really showed how much people in India see. I mean, in India, unfortunately, curtsy its weather and climatic conditions and all of that is not a very outdoorsy nation, right? For recreation, you don't go for a hike, you don't go to a park, you don't go trekking because you don't have one the weather that really is conducive for it for a good 8 months out of 12. And second, you don't have places like those which are very close to the cities. And therefore, an outing for a family or for a bunch of friends or for a date for Indians is going to the movies. And the way we embraced cinema with these two films as Indians, I thought was a bit of a delightful moment for all of us in the movies who really felt that if you do offer some content that is pioneering and unique and novel, people are going to turn up and embrace the theatrical format and experience. So that was definitely something that was, much celebrated among all of us in the movie business.
And did the dubbed versions of these two films fare well as well?
To be honest, Himanshu, not as much. It's actually the English versions of both these films that did incredibly well,
That
even in
makes
the
sense.
tier towns, right? Where generally it's the dubbed versions that fare better than the original English language versions. It was still the English versions that did better business, even in tier two towns, than the Hindi business of these films. And generally, the kind of films for which the Hindi version or the Tamil Telugu versions do well are the big ticket action franchises, right? So Fast and the Furious would do really well in those versions. The Mission Impossible would do really well in those versions. But for films like these, it's generally the English language version that appeals to the crowd or the psychographic that is excited about these kind of films, and therefore it was the English version that did way more business than the Hindi version of either of these films.
And then actually, we got to talk about the other blockbuster of 2023, which is Gadar 2. And, no one expected, again, this film to be as big as it turned out to be. And obviously, there was the whole Gadar nostalgia, and there is a certain history with it. But why do you think Gadar 2 worked so well in spite of like mixed reviews and in spite of pretty much nothing new at the story level, I guess?
So, Himanshu, even before I speak about the reasons for its success, let me actually point something out, right? Out of these four films that became the tentpoles of 2023, which is Pathaan, Jawan, Gadar, and Animal, um, as much as the numbers for Jawan and Pathaan as much as the numbers for Jawan were slightly higher than Gadar in terms of the declared net box office, in terms of your footfall, Gadar was the film of 2023
Wow.
because average ticket price of Gadar was significantly lower than Jawan as well as Pathaan. And the extent to which Gadar fared well in the single screen in the tier 2, tier 3 towns, where the ticket rates are as low as $100 or $120 compared to the average price of Pathaan and Jawan, just showed the fact that the footfall for Gadar were drastically, not just marginally, but drastically higher than any of the other three films that came along. So Gadar was truly the biggest success that we've seen in a very long time in terms of the pure footfalls. And that to me is a huge victory. Now, about the reasons, I'm unsure. Sure, there was a big nostalgic value. But having said that, I truly think this was mainstream, old school, classic Hindi cinema with the right emotions, the right entertainment value, and the right elements delivered to the audience that has been craving that for the longest time. You know, the Hindi film fraternity, and especially the new age filmmakers, are so elitist and urban in terms of their mindset and storytelling style that they've actually alienated the audience that lives and celebrates and craves for entertainment in tier 2, tier 3, and even tier 4 towns. Because there, in those markets, there's no avenue of recreation and entertainment barring going to the movies. If you're in a Mumbai or a Delhi or a Chennai or a Hyderabad or a Bangalore, to do your time pass for a weekend, in Bombay, you can step out, to a mall. You can go to a nice restaurant. You can head off to a place like Lonavala or to an Imagica with your kids. You can do so many other things. You can go to an NMAC or an NCP and watch a play. You can sit at home and consume something on Netflix. But in tier 3, tier 4 towns where Gadar went hyper ballistic, none of these avenues exist, or none of these avenues really cater to those sensibilities. So a huge starved audience which had not been served anything from Hindi cinema that catered to their mindset and sensibility suddenly turned up in huge numbers, because finally, after so long, a movie that actually appealed to them in the true sense came along. And along with that, I think the fact that the amazing thing that I saw, Himanshu. So for Pathaan, right, for the songs, you had people dancing in the aisles. For Jawan, you had people dancing in the aisles. For Gadar, you had people for the two songs that were recreated, right? Main Ikla Gaddi Leke and the other one. There were people, and when I say people, I don't mean a few people. All the people in a cinema hall, and I'm talking hundreds of them, singing along. And that to me was beautiful, right? I mean, the nostalgic value really showed how long the shelf life of those iconic songs from the first Gadar, which came 20 years ago, were. And that sort of nostalgia and celebration of cinema at play is what all of us exhibitors really live for, because ultimately the economic angle of it and all of that's fine. Somewhere I believe all of us really crave for a happy audience, an audience that for those 3 hours is in the escapist mode and walks out in a mood that's significantly happier than what their mood was when they walked into theaters. When they walk out in a mood that's celebratory, they walk out on an emotional high, right? That's something that all of us work for and all of us live for and all of us really love. And I really think that Gadar did that to a huge number of people. And like I said, across the length and breadth of the Hindi speaking beds, which was delightful.
And now a question to the movie buff in you, not the exhibitor. Do you think Sunny Deol is going to be able to carry this forward for his other films?
Himanshu, I hope so. I'm a
I know, yeah,
90s kid, so I've grown up on Ghayal and Ghatak and Indian and
absolutely.
all those
Yeah.
films. And I really think that all of those films were so much fun, right? I mean, the films that played to the gallery, that had those clap moments that made people go apeshit crazy, clap and whistle in the aisles. And Sunny Deol is truly one of those grassroots mass stars from the time that we grew up in and has a serious fan following of his own till date. And I truly think that in the last 20 years, barring Gadar, of course, there weren't too many films that did justice to his image and stardom and what he really stands for as a cinematic icon. And I truly hope that people can make movies that do justice to the Sunny Deol that we are all fans of. And it's very exciting to see somebody like Rajkumar Santoshi, with whom he's delivered so many iconic films, coming back to make a film with him that's being produced by Amir Khan Productions, where you have, him coming along with Preeti Zinta, who I think, and they've been an iconic pair in the past. And Rajkumar Santoshi and Sunny Deol have been such an iconic team. These two coming together and being backed by a phenomenal producer who's a powerhouse in his own right, like Mr. Amir Khan. I think it's a lethal combination, and I truly hope that Lahore as a film comes to theaters and does has an incredible impact. So I really hope that can happen to Sunny Deol all over again.
Yes, yes, same here, absolutely. And I think Sunny still has that star appeal, and he can pull it off if he gets a good story. So fingers crossed. And
Not
then
just a
Akshay,
story,
sorry, go ahead.
a film does justice to his image, right? Because some of these actors are the off-screen persona of these actors is way bigger than the characters they play on screen. And Sunny Deol is one of them, right? Um, okay, guys, tune down the volume. That Sunny Deol does is way more iconic than any dialogue that he says in any of his films. And you saw that happen in Gadar, and you saw the kind of reaction that there is to Sunny Deol's screams, and that is something that people absolutely love and adore and celebrate. So as long as these films can also play to his off-screen persona, to his stardom, can do what is called fan service, I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun in the theaters when these movies come along.
Right. And then Akshay, Animal comes around the end of the year. It's a highly, polarizing film. At least, I saw this on Twitter. Like a lot of Ranbir fans were very nervous because I think there was a feeling that, this film is going to be fairly binary. Either it's going to be really huge, which is what it turned out to be, or this is going to sink like a, huge rock. Honestly, tell me this, was there a feeling, similar feeling among exhibitors as well?
Himanshu, Animal is what I call 2023's out of syllabus question for the entertainment industry. Nobody saw it do the kind of numbers that it did. Of course, all of us had a very good feeling about it when the trailer came along, right? When the teaser came, it was very iffy. Where people don't know which way it's going. People didn't know what the premise of the film is. Everyone was talking about it being the Godfather of Gurgaon, and all of those conversations happened. But when that trailer came along, I thought that was super impactful. And that somewhere gave at least me the assurance that, okay, this film has the potential to really surprise us. And after that trailer, when the songs came along and, all of that happened, which I think was one of the
Music really
best
caught on.
albums last year. Absolutely. It was one of the best curated OSTs of 2023, right? When all of that happened and the momentum kept building up to the release, that gave us a lot of confidence that, okay, this film, if the content is right and it connects, can be a 6 hour of the park. And that's what thankfully happened. And again, Himanshu, that's a film that for the first time, I think, possibly since Ajab Prem Ki Gajab Kahani, took Ranbir to the least common denominator of the social strata, where people in the smallest town that a cinema exists in the Hindi speaking belt turned up in big numbers for a Ranbir Kapoor film. And I really think that, every actor has that one film that gives him or her the opportunity to really go from being an actor to being, or from being a star to being a superstar. I really think this is the film that's given Ranbir Kapoor that opportunity. It's almost like this film has chosen Ranbir Kapoor, and now the choices that Ranbir Kapoor makes will chart the course of whether he goes on to become one of the most iconic superstars of India, which I really think he's capable of, or if he goes back to just being a star. Because after the kind of connect that he's been given with this film to everybody in this country, the commonest of the common man, the choices that he makes will really determine whether he continues to consolidate on this superstardom that he's really started, building for himself, or it fizzles out. And I truly hope that the kind of choices that he makes allows him to really be the next superstar that our country has, or the Hindi film industry has, after Hrithik Roshan, which happened a long time ago. And the choice that he's made, which is the remake of Sangam, apparently by Mr. Sanjay Leela Bhansali, surely has the potential for him to continue to consolidate that stardom. And I really hope that can happen for him.
Yeah, I think the connect that Animal has, bought Ranbir is priceless. I mean, it's more than any of the box office or, awards or anything, because this is something that can truly be harvested into a generational thing. Like, for example, kids who are in their teens or early 20s who right now who have watched Animal, Ranbir could be their star for the rest of their lives, like Bachchan
One
was or Shah
a
Rukh.
lot of their teens have not watched it because it was an A-rated film, if I
That's
remember
true.
it right.
Yes, I'm sure they have watched pirated versions. Yes, right,
It's possibly on Netflix now.
right. And before we move on, Akshay, I just wanted to ask you. So, is life good for single screen cinemas now after 2023, or there are still some issues that are going to, crop up again once we have a dry year?
Himanshu, see, the issue for single screen cinemas has never been the business, right? It's actually the opportunity cost, because the last few single screens that were made in this country were actually made 20, 25 years ago. And since then, the real estate, the locations they were built at, has become so central to the cities and towns they're in, that the value of the real estate on which they are situated has become incredibly, high. And therefore, to just generate business out of one cinema screen is actually, not optimally unlocking the value of that real estate. And that's why most of them are not shutting down, because the business is not great. Most of them are shutting down because the opportunity cost for that land they are situated on is much higher. So all of them are actually shutting down to unlock the value of the real estate they are situated in. Now, it's a bit sad to a cinema purist like me who's really grown up in these single screens, watching the celebration of cinema among 800, 900 people. But unfortunately, these are market forces that play more than anything else. But having said that, in terms of the content that really appealed and worked in a big way, all these films, right? Pathaan, Jawan, Animal, Gadar, Kerala Story, Kashmir Files, all these films have done incredibly well, and as well in single screens as they've done in the multiplexes. In fact, the concept of an urban blockbuster is really passe, and now there are universal films that are really doing the kind of numbers that are redefining benchmarks. So all these films have done well across the exhibition sector. Unlike a lot of them in the past, like your stereotypical Ayushmann Khurrana film that would do well in the past, or a Rajkumar Rao blockbuster, you aren't seeing those do too well. The exceptions of, let's say, a Satya Prem Ki Katha, a Zarat Ki Ramanaj Ki, Sam Bahadur, which are predominantly urban hits, but most films that have really shaken the industry up and made heads turn and brought footfalls in huge numbers have done that across the length and breadth of the exhibition sector. And obviously, when a certain grade or a certain kind or a certain category of films succeed, they result in more films of the category or of the type being made. And therefore, a lot of films that are now under production or that are being conceptualized are actually films that will appeal to the length and breadth of the exhibition sector. So that's actually good news for the single screens in some sense.
Yes, and here's hoping that the renaissance of mass cinema, across languages provides some tailwind to that as well. So hopefully, much better days for them too. But yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. Unless the owners are really people, who are passionate about cinema, it does make sense for them to, unlock the value, like you said.
Growth,
Uh,
precisely.
Unfortunately, yes. Akshay, I wanted to ask you about the Dunki versus Salar clash, and I mean, what went wrong there? Because I kept on thinking that sooner or later this is going to resolve, and there's no way that they're coming on the same date, but apparently not. So why was one side so adamant about it, and what were the reasons behind that?
In Himanshu, to be honest, a lot of what happened before that weekend in terms of the screen distribution and the programming was unfortunately out in the public domain. While I really think that the business of the movies should be discussed and should be kept within the closed doors of the industry. Unfortunately, we are living in a day and age where a lot of these battles are fought very publicly and it gets ugly. And I thought it was the lowest moment in recent times for the business of entertainment where we were neither, as an industry, right? We were neither pragmatic nor dignified about the way we did this. And that I think was really sad. And I hope it doesn't set a precedent for the way things are played out when two iconic or two big movies come along on the same date. Because out of the 52 weeks that we have in a year and the thousands of movies that release, there may be times when big movies will come together on the same weekend where on Eid you had Bade Miyan Chote Miyan and Maidan coming along. On 15th August, as of now, you have Singham and Pushpa coming along. I hope as an industry, we can be a lot more pragmatic and more so dignified about the way we go about doing our business, right? And having said that, I really think that movies like Donkey and Saldar could have very easily coexisted seamlessly because both are movies that actually cater to very different demographics. Uh, an overwhelming majority of the people who would be excited about a movie like Donkey would probably have not cared as much about Salar and vice versa. And despite that, something like that happening was really uncalled for. But in terms of the footfalls in the business that happened, well, strangely, the business for both the films, those were a little underwhelming compared to the kind of expectations that were pegged on them, right? You have Rajkumar Irani, who's had a flawless track record before this, working for the first time with an iconic superstar like Shah Rukh Khan, and then you had Prabhas, who after Bahubali, which was an iconic film for Indian cinema, coming together with Prashant Neel, who had proven his merit as somebody who really knows how to present a superstar and create some great theatrical moments on screen, which he showed in KGF, coming together with Prabhas. So both of these were fairly iconic in that sense, and unfortunately, both didn't live up to the kind of expectations that we had of them. But having said that, yeah, I mean, it was fairly clear that Donkey did very well in the urban centers and didn't do much in Tier 2 and Tier 3 India. And Salar did what it did only in Tier 2, Tier 3 India and didn't do much with urban sensibilities. So that's what happened. And as I see it, I mean, to me, the relatively underwhelming performance of Donkey, I had attributed nothing but to the law of averages for Rajkumar Irani. Because how many filmmakers had delivered a Munna Bhai, followed by a Lagi Rao Munna Bhai, followed by a Three Idiots, followed by a Peaky, followed by, I mean, who has delivered such iconic films in such succession? Very few filmmakers have been able to deliver blockbuster after blockbuster after blockbuster. The law of averages catches up with the best of us, right? And that's probably what happened to Mr. Rajkumar Irani. And with one film that I'm not saying failed but underperformed, you can't take away from the man's brilliance. I'm sure the next one that he makes will again be iconic and something that all of us, the business as well as the audience, will look forward to.
So, Akshay, I'm trying to still understand the clash. Was that more of an ego tussle than any business rationale behind it? Because like you said, I mean, they cater to different audiences. So, there was this sense that maybe this has to do with the business side as well. But are you saying that it was more of a ego tussle?
To be honest, if I have to call a spade, yes, that's exactly what it was. And that is where it gets unfortunate, right? I'm all for people battling it out for, in the interest of business being optimized. But when, the decisions are taken on the basis of trying to harm the other person rather than trying to optimize your own business, that's where it not just gets sad, but it also gets, and I'm sorry I have to say this, stupid. And unfortunately, in this scenario, that's exactly what it was, where there was more focus on harming the other guy than on optimizing your own business. And ultimately, Himanshu, you can open to whatever showcasing and screen count on a Friday. When the merit of your movie or the demerits of it start delivering, ultimately, every movie, much like water finds its level. And ultimately, it's not about the capacity or the count of screen or the count of shows it has. Ultimately, the business is about the number of people who buy a ticket and turn up. And on that count, sadly, both the movies underperform. So at the end of it, it's all of us in the entertainment sector, be it, the people who were the producers or the distributors of the film, or us exhibitors. All of us walked out like people who had lost a battle after fighting one. And this was truly one of those lose lose situations rather than a win win, which is what all of us as an ecosystem should be working towards creating. And that's what leaves me a little heartbroken and hopeful of the fact that this doesn't turn up to be the precedent for the future. I hope we learn from what we did wrong and
Right.
not do it ever again.
And actually, let's talk about something that surprised a lot of us is the success of 12th Fail in theaters. Vidhu Vinod Chopra recently said that he was told not to release this movie in the theaters because people won't flock to the theaters for this kind of film. But it's been doing really well, and that kind of raises this question. Because I've always wondered, should films like Three of Us and Gulmohar, should these movies have also released in theaters? Because I really think, if the storytelling is good, people will come to the cinema halls. We have this notion that certain films are for the big screen and certain films are for OTT, but we have so many examples in front of us, and 12 Fell being the latest one, where if it's a triumph of storytelling, people will flock to the theaters. What do you think?
Well, absolutely, Himanshu. I can see this now because this is in the past. I was actually very privileged to watch 12 Fail almost 2 months before its release, where Vidhu Vinod Chopra, being the man he is, had the confidence to start showing it to dozens of people, even in its rough cut. And that's what showed his conviction as a filmmaker in a movie that was coming to the theaters and had none of the crutches that were being spoken about as the tools or as the elements that make a film a theatrical watch. It didn't have a superstar in the lead cast. It didn't have the big size and scale. It didn't have elements like 3D, 4DX, or any of these gimmicks. None of it. It's a movie that worked purely and purely on the merit of its storytelling, and that I think became the reason or the thing that made turns that made heads turn and made all of us in the industry and the audience realize that at the end of the day, uh, we are storytellers as an industry. And if we can really back our storytelling with serious conviction, and if we can believe in telling tales that connect with the audience for their emotions, uh, we can, quell and break every preconceived notion, every theory, every bit of analysis, every bit of these, talks of what works, what doesn't work, what's theatrical, what's non-theatrical. All of those notions can be shattered. And got to give it to Mr. Vidhu Vinod Chopra for his conviction behind 12 Fail and for doing what he did with the film. And I truly think that this film will not just be remembered for its success, but be remembered for inspiring dozens of filmmakers to back their storytelling with the right conviction and take it to theaters. And I really hope that this is the kind of cinema. See, the tentpoles will come, they will do great numbers, right? But eventually, at those budgets with those stars, we can only make 12, 14, 18, 20 movies in an year, right? But to take you from one tentpole to the other, you need these movies, the mid-budget films, the small films, which are high on content, to sustain and have a long shelf life in theaters and to keep bringing the audiences in. And this will what will make us a truly healthy industry. So I really think it's a movie that's changed the game and taken us back to what our core really should be, which is great storytelling. The size, scale, the stars are all elements that elevate the business. But at core, there's no film that has size or scale or a superstar that does well without great storytelling. And this is a movie that's really shown us that at core, it's our storytelling that makes us succeed. So that's the most beautiful thing about this film.
Yes, yes. And what do you think is going on with Fighter, which is raking in really great numbers here, everywhere overseas. But apparently in India, it's not as expected.
It's not as as per expectation, but it's still a film that's done 200 crores at the net box, of net box office.
Great film. I
Really,
really enjoyed Fighter.
likewise, Himanshu. I mean, I really thought it was a movie that pushed the envelope on so many counts for Hindi cinema, right? I mean, I genuinely think that the actions, what they did with the aircraft, was truly world class. And people were saying that they were copying a lot of Top Gun Maverick and all of that. So I actually happened to speak to somebody who's from the Air Force. And the person said that, okay, whether it's the Indian Air Force or the American Air Force or any other
Exactly.
Air Force in the world,
Right.
Cobra maneuver is a Cobra maneuver. And you can't really do with an aircraft in a plane something that really, defies what the laws of physics or what an aircraft can do being done. So I really think that eventually a lot of what we saw in Top Gun Maverick was truly authentic to how aerial combat functions. And beyond a point, you can't really go beyond that. If people did, a lot of people would say that, hey, what's happening? This is, beating the laws of physics, or this is stupid, gimmicky nonsense that's happening. So whatever you do, you would be scrutinized. And glad that, Siddharth Anand decided to stay authentic to the way aerial combat happens or the way the kind of protocols that are followed by the Indian Air Force. And thankfully, there was absolutely no criticism on those grounds, which I think is fairly commendable. So I personally definitely enjoyed the film about the way its business was and the way it kind of underperformed in some sense. Personally, I'm a little heartbroken about that because I really loved the film. I thought it had the elements that could have opened up a different genre of action films to do well. And I wish that had happened with Fighter.
Any
And here's the
speculation or
right. I mean, sorry.
any posturizing as to why it did not do as well as expected in some pockets?
So specific pockets, Himanshu, right? It didn't. The difference between a fighter and a Pathaan, Jawan, Gadar animal was that the tier two, tier three towns, the long tail of the market, didn't perform up to expectation. It actually became a bit of an urban hit because of the kind of sensibilities and storytelling style that it followed. Had it been a lot more massive in terms of its storytelling, maybe it would have not been able to follow the protocols that are related to the Indian Air Force, and then you would have a lot of jingoism, a lot of massy movements that would just push all the protocols and stuff related to the Indian Air Force out of the window. So it was actually a tightrope for Siddharth Anand to walk, and I think what he did was fairly commendable. And even if it did end up in losing out on the mass markets, he at least stuck to the right protocols and sensibilities around something that's as I'd say dignified and as glorious as the Indian Air Force's protocols. That's okay. I mean, some films have to really look beyond the box office, and I think Fighter would be remembered a lot more kindly by cinema history in India.
I think so. You get a feeling that this is the kind of film that's going to do really well on OTT. So, once it's out there on streaming, it's going to do really well. So, Akshay, now let's talk a little bit about regional cinema and especially Marathi cinema, because I know you have cinema halls in Maharashtra, in Nagpur. I wanted to, since I told you I was in India, so I went to this Marathi film, Ole Ale, which is a Nana Patekar film. And I went, on a weekday afternoon in third week, and the cinema hall was almost packed. So first of all, it's great to see, this kind of response to a Marathi film. But my question to you is that, so it seems to me that these films are doing really well. But in spite of that, regional films, and especially Marathi films, especially, have to fight for a number of screens more often than not. So how does that work? Like, what are the reasons behind that?
Himanshu, about regional cinema doing well, I think, post the pandemic, not just Marathi cinema, but across regional fraternities, you had some iconic films, right? Where one of the highest grossing Marathi films of all time was Baipan Bhari, which, was, like I said, a huge Marathi success. In Tamil, you had Vikram in Jailer, which really went off the roofs and became the highest two grossing Tamil films of all time. You had similar scenarios with Telugu, with Punjabi, with Gujarati, with all these fraternities. So it's really great to see the resurgence of regional cinema in such a big way, and I think that's really interesting. Now, about Marathi movies not getting the right kind of creams or showcasing, Himanshu, I truly believe in it's a little sad what's happening to Marathi cinema, where movies that are really bringing the audience in big numbers have absolutely no complaints about the right kind of showcasing, right? Sadly, a overwhelming majority of Marathi films are not being able to draw the audiences in big numbers. Now, programming is not done basis the language the film, is made in, or the kind of stars attached, or any of that. Programming and showcasing on in screen is done purely on the basic law of economics, which is the law of demand and supply. Any movie, this could be Marathi, this could be Chhattisgarhi, this could be Gujarati, this could be Punjabi, this could be whatever, will get the number of screens and showcasing that is in proportion to the number of people who are interested in watching this. And there are enough cases of films that open really small with a small count of screens and then just kept adding screens in multifold because there were people who wanted to watch it. And this didn't happen after a week, it happened on day two, right? Kashmir Files, who would have thought that a film featuring Mr. Anupam Kher and Mithun Chakravarti and all of that will do these kind of numbers? On day one, it opened with some 300 odd screens. Day two, it became 450. Day three, it became 700. By the end of the week, it was running in 2,500 screens. The same thing can happen to Marathi movies. But ultimately, the only thing that can do that to Marathi film is a huge number of people wanting to buy tickets to it and turning up in cinemas. And the day that happens to not just Marathi, but like I said, films from any languages. Ultimately, Himanshu, our job as exhibitors is to give the audiences the ability to watch a film that they want to watch. And why would we not do that to any film from any language if people are willing to turn up? Sadly, for a lot of Marathi films, not as many people are willing to turn up in proportion to the kind of showcasing that people think they deserve. And if filmmakers make films that will draw those sort of audiences, there's no doubt about the fact that films will be given great showcasing. And we've seen that happen to so many Marathi films. We saw that happen to Ritesh Deshmukh's Where, where it got terror chasing across the length and breadth of the country, of Maharashtra. We've seen that happen to Baipan Bari. We've seen that happen to so many Marathi films.
So you're saying a film like Jimma or Baipan or something, they won't have a problem getting the screens because they
I've
are
never
bringing.
seen, I've never seen the producers of these films complain about the lack of showcasing, because the only thing that these films did compared to the ones that did get showcasing was draw audiences to the theaters.
I see. That's interesting. Okay, that's something new to me. It puts a different lens to it, but that makes sense. And Akshay, do you think that in the wake of films like Pathaan, Jawan, even Fighter, we are going to see a deluge of action films now? Because since action seems to be a genre that has just kind of, awakened. And do you think that we're going to, as a result, we're also going to have subpar action films coming out, in the next year or two? And it's just going to be action, 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 because that seems to be working at the theaters.
I mean, Himanshu, it's a double-edged sword, right? Where one, action and mass appealing films are great and they bring audiences to cinemas in big numbers. But we're also an industry that works so hard on trying to replicate success that something that succeeds, or a genre or a style of filmmaking that succeeds, we saturate it in no time, right? I mean, if you go back in time when the NRI cinema was a fad, you suddenly had two films, right? Ghajini and Wanted, that came and changed the game. And that really resulted in the revival of mass cinema that brought single screen back into play in a huge way. And then every actor, without naming them, who had no capability or appeal to do those kind of films wanted to play a cop in a mass appealing film where one punch would make five guys fly away. Now, by doing that in the most substandard and silly manner, we saturated that genre as well. Till some other genre had to come and start bringing people back into theaters. Manchu, as an exhibitor, I really believe that it's important to serve every genre and every category of cinema, appealing to different demographics at any and every given point of time. You can't alienate a certain audience at any given point of time because cinema that caters to another audience is doing well. To be a healthy, sustainable industry, you need a ship of thesis as much as you need a wanted. You need a Pathaan as much as you need a Satya Prem Ki Katha, as much as you need a Sam Parker, as much as you need an animal. And only by doing that will we keep getting every category, every demographic, every psychographic of the country hooked onto the theatrical format, interested in turning up at the theaters. So I really hope that we can very consciously mix things up and offer every genre, every kind of cinema to the audiences in every single week of the year. And only when we can do that will we be a very sustainable, a very fundamentally solid industry. So I hope that action continues to do well and continues to be made in huge numbers. But I also hope that we can bring people back with rom-coms. I also hope that we can bring people into theaters for social dramas. I also hope we can bring people to theaters for political films. I also hope that we can bring people to theaters with comedies, with every genre there is, whether it's urban films, rural films, mass appealing films, films that cater to the urban audiences or whatever else. We need it all at any given point of time.
Well said. Well said. And finally, actually, a couple of rapid fire questions. Okay, just short ones. The film of 2024 that you think is going to shatter all kind of records.
Uh, Between Pushpa 2 and Singham, could be any.
And one film that's going to come out in 2024 that relatively nobody is talking about, but you think could really rake up the numbers.
It's being spoken about now after the first unit came out. But one film that I think will really surprise a lot of people is Ajay Devgan and Maddie and Jyotika's Shaitan.
Who's making that film?
Vikas Behl is the director.
Oh, right. I think the teaser is out, right?
The teaser is out. It's the remake of a Gujarati film called Vash, and I really think it's a genre and a film that's very exciting to get on.
Okay, so Shaitan is the one to watch out for. Akshay, thanks a lot. This was really great. And, just like me, I think there are so many, lovers of Hindi cinema that don't have a clear idea of how the business works and, what kind of numbers, the patterns that they reflect and so forth. So I think, with this episode, we have shed some light on that, for people like us who are not in the business and try to understand, how does the business work of the films that we love so much and that we have enjoyed watching, and also in turn how that has helped to revive the exhibition business, which like we talked about has been through a lot since COVID, especially the single screen cinemas. So there is hope for single screen cinemas, and like I said, with the renaissance of mass cinema again in all languages, we can really hope that screen cinemas are again as strong as they used to be. So here's hoping for that.
Fingers crossed, Himanshu. I mean, here's hoping that everybody, every producer, every exhibitor, every distributor, every filmmaker, every star prospers because this is, like I said, an industry that that gives, at least in the context of the Indian audience, we don't just entertain people. We just don't make them appreciate art. We give them escapism from the harsh realities of their lives. And I'm not saying this for the urban multiplexy audience. I'm talking about the common man, right? And if we are an industry that gives people 3 hours of joy, I think we're not just doing a business. We're actually doing a certain degree of service to the people out there. And I hope we can, for the sake of that, continue to prosper and do well and have revenue so that we can reinvest them back into the movies and grow this industry to be what our prime minister calls, and I truly believe, the soft power of our nation. I truly believe that we can be that. We can, as an industry, be the cultural ambassadors of this nation. We can be that bridge that connects people from across the world to India in a big way. And I truly hope that as an industry, we can prosper enough and we can make an impact not just domestically but also globally, uh, in more ways that than the common man or the common notions really talk about.
Thank you so much, Akshay. Thank you.
Pleasure, Himanshu. Always a pleasure, dude.
If you liked the episode, do consider supporting the show. Your support will help me continue creating content like this. You can find the link for supporting the show in the show notes and on the pod website. Also, do share this episode on Twitter, Insta, or Facebook. And do subscribe, rate, and review the pod wherever you listen to your pods. You can follow me on Twitter and Insta at loveofcinemasf8. Feel free to reach out there or by email with your comments, feedback, and suggestions. You can find my email in the show notes. That's the episode. This is Himanshu signing off. And as always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.